Boa noite. Ela é uma das maiores autoridades em relações internacionais, professora da Universidade de Harvard e também jornalista, e como correspondente de guerra, cobriu conflitos na antiga Iugoslávia, Sudão, Ruanda e Timor-Leste. Entre 2005 e 2008, ela foi a principal assessora para assuntos de política externa do candidato democrata à presidência da República dos Estados Unidos, Barack Obama. A entrevistada do programa Roda Viva dessa noite é a jornalista e escritora Samantha Power, que acaba de lançar uma biografia do diplomata brasileiro Sérgio Vieira de Mello, morto num atentado no Iraque há 5 anos. Você vê a entrevista no instante. A jornalista Samantha Power conviveu com o diplomata Sérgio Vieira de Mello na ex-Iugoslávia e teve outros encontros ocasionais depois dos Balcãs. Ela como jornalista e ele como alto comissário da ONU. Mas admite, conheceu o brasileiro apenas após realizar mais de 400 entrevistas durante 4 anos, tempo que levou para elaborar a biografia dele.
O homem que queria salvar o mundo. O livro abre uma discussão sobre o papel da ONU no século XXI, ao contar a história de Sérgio Vieira de Mello, carioca de nascimento que viveu grande parte da vida fora do país devido à carreira diplomática do pai e depois por ter se tornado também diplomata. Ingressou nas Nações Unidas ainda muito jovem e chegou ao Alto Comissariado da ONU. Trabalhou principalmente em zonas de conflito como Bangladesh, Camboja, Moçambique, Bósnia, Líbano, Timor-Leste e no Iraque pós-Saddam Hussein, quando um caminhão de explosivos atingiu o escritório da ONU, onde Sérgio Vieira trabalhava, matando o diplomata e mais 21 pessoas. A morte dele fez aumentar o debate sobre o papel da ONU, que desde sua criação tenta administrar conflitos no mundo e cada vez mais tende a enfrentar seus próprios conflitos internos. Em 2003, Samantha Power recebeu o prêmio Pulitzer pela publicação de outro livro, Genocídio, a retórica americana em questão. Nele, defende a tese da incapacidade do governo americano, durante várias gestões, de impedir genocídios pelo mundo. Ela critica a política de tolerância dos Estados Unidos diante das violações dos direitos humanos em alguns países. Nascida na Irlanda, aos 9 anos foi para os Estados Unidos. Formou-se em Direito e depois, como jornalista, trabalhou como correspondente de guerra na Iugoslávia, Sudão, Ruanda e Timor. De 2005 a 2008, foi assessora de política internacional do senador Barack Obama e se transformou numa das principais conselheiras do candidato democrata à presidência dos Estados Unidos. Deixou o cargo depois de um incidente que criou ao chamar a senadora Hillary Clinton de monstro e uma pessoa capaz de qualquer coisa para vencer Obama na indicação do partido. Além de jornalista, Samantha Power é professora da Universidade de Harvard e colunista da revista Time.
Para entrevistar a jornalista e escritora Samantha Power, convidamos Carlos Eduardo Lins da Silva, ombudsman da Folha de São Paulo e integrante do Grupo de Análise de Conjuntura Internacional da USP. Roberto Lamerinhas, subeditor internacional do jornal O Estado de São Paulo. Carlos Taquari, editor executivo do Jornal da Cultura. José Augusto Guilhon Albuquerque, pesquisador do Núcleo de Pesquisa em Relações Internacionais da Universidade de São Paulo e professor aposentado de Relações Internacionais da Faculdade de Economia e Administração da USP. E Laís Duarte, que é repórter do Núcleo de Jornalismo da Cultura, que traz para a entrevista as perguntas enviadas por telespectadores. Temos também a participação do cartunista Paulo Caruso, registrando todos os momentos desse programa. Nós estamos gravando esse programa numa terça-feira, dia 19 de agosto, há exatos 5 anos do atentado do dia 19 de agosto de 2003, que matou o diplomata brasileiro Sérgio Vieira de Mello. Samantha, logo no início do seu livro, um jornalista menciona que Sérgio Vieira de Mello era uma mistura entre James Bond e Robert Kennedy. Ele era tão especial assim?
Well, now that I've been in Brazil a while, I'm meeting lots of people who are like James Bond. But he was special like that because, like James Bond, he was a person who was drawn to danger, to war zones, to violent places and violent people, because he recognized that where violence was, pain was, and he wanted to deal with the pain. Like Bobby Kennedy, he was an idealist, but not simply an idealist. I call him something of a Machiavellian idealist, a realistic idealist. He could be ruthlessly pragmatic, Sergio could, on behalf of the goals of human rights and humanitarianism. So I've never really met anybody with that combination before.
Agora, sem querer fazer uma caricatura, lances da vida de Sérgio Vieira de Mello também lembram um pouco o herói do cinema, o Indiana Jones, né? Porque, às vezes, ele se colocava tão disponível em relação às suas ideias, né? Como no momento em Sarajevo que ele se nega a usar um colete à prova de balas, porque a população não estava usando. Tinha também uma certa, uma exagerada forma de doação por parte dele, não?
Well, I think that Sergio thought a lot about dignity, which can sound a little bit like a cliche, but dignity, a consideration of dignity is very rare in geopolitics. Very, very rare that people internalize what other individuals around them are actually going through and their sense of self-respect and self-esteem. So I think Sergio, when he sort of flamboyantly doesn't wear a flak jacket, it's not simply to say I'm a tough guy, I'm macho, you know, I'm a Brazilian in war. I think it's more really about showing the ordinary people that he's with them, that he's not special, he's not separate from them. You know, when one looks at the United States in Iraq, you see, and U.S. embassies all around the world, you see they've become like fortresses with big walls and barbed wire, and they send a signal, you know, we're different than you, and we're distant from you. Sergio always wanted to send the opposite signal and to live intermingled. He also felt like he couldn't make good policy unless he experienced what it was like to live a little more like ordinary people were living. If he knew what it felt like to walk without a flak jacket, he would have a better insight as to how to fix things.
Samantha, eu sei que é difícil falar sobre hipóteses, mas muita gente acha que o Sérgio Vieira de Mello poderia se tornar o secretário-geral da ONU. Eu queria perguntar para você se você concorda com isso e se ele tivesse se tornado, o que poderia ter mudado a ONU? Ele tinha planos para mudar a ONU?
First of all, I think I have no doubt that Sergio Vieira de Mello would have been Secretary General of the United Nations. There was no individual, and there is today, unfortunately, no individual who had his combination of diplomatic savvy and Machiavellian instinct as to how to deal with big, powerful governments, but also this experience gained in the field, in war zones, 14 war zones over a 34-year career, and an incredible instinct and calm as to how to deal with emergencies in the moment of crisis. So today, he would be in Georgia figuring out what to do with the Russians and how to get a troop withdrawal. Last year, he would have been in Darfur. He would have continued to be the person that we turn to in the world. I don't think he would have been Secretary General in this current term because it was Asia's turn, and with the explosion of China and other countries in Asia, they wanted to have an Asian in that position. But as soon as Ban Ki-moon's term is over, I think our desperation to make some progress with peace and to do away with some of the polarization in the world would have led us inevitably to Sergio's doorstep. And in terms of what he would have done, it would have been very difficult. The world now is more divided than it ever had been in Sergio's lifetime. Divisions between North and South, religious and secular, Muslim and West, East and West, developed and developing. I mean, so many fissures. And the challenge of the United Nations is, of course, that it brings together all of our imperfect divisions and all of our worst habits, as well as some of our best habits. So Sergio would have had to navigate something very, very treacherous politically. But again, no one was better capable of doing that. Could he have fixed the UN? No, he was not a messiah. But could he have bridged some of these divisions and made people see that they had more in common than they had apart? I have no doubt.
Quais mudanças poderiam ser feitas hoje na ONU para que ela enfrente um mundo como hoje, um mundo com conflitos cheios de extremismos políticos, religiosos, situações de política e estratégia, como agora a Rússia na Geórgia? Que mudanças precisam ser feitas na ONU hoje?
Well, I think we make a mistake, honestly, by talking about the changes that need to occur within the organization, in the sense that blaming the UN or looking to the UN to think about how to heal divisions, in a way is like looking to a local Sao Paulo football stadium in order to understand why the team is playing badly. In other words, you're looking at the building that contains within it the problems. And so I think to your question, if the UN is to fix, it is clearly the countries within it that have to fix. My country, for instance, the United States, has to decide that it's serious about global warming, or it will be very difficult within the United Nations for there to be an important agreement, a global agreement, in order to deal with global warming. We have to re-engage with international law, the Geneva Conventions, and stop alienating the world, so that when we show up within the United Nations with a good idea about what to do about Georgia, people listen to us and they trust us. Trust is completely shattered right now within the organization. But I think for too long we've looked to the UN, the building, the organization, to fix the relations among countries. And what has to happen is, I think, countries like Brazil and other middle powers, rising powers, can play a very important role as a bridge between the United States and Russia, or the United States, Russia, China, and the major powers. But reform of the UN will come bottom up, not top down. And I think the main issue is, are we going to, like Sergio, are we going to decide that these global challenges matter to us as citizens in our countries? You know, are Brazilian citizens going to support Lula in order to deal with peacekeeping, to deal with poverty, to deal with global warming, etc.? Or are presidents and prime ministers around the world going to continue to cater to the domestic and not think about global relations as much as they should?
Samantha.
Politics is the answer.
Existe hoje alguém na ONU que tem perfil parecido com o do Sérgio? Existe algum substituto para o Sérgio Vieira de Mello na ONU?
I wish I could say that there was a big roster of Sergios, but when Sergio died, as you know, the Secretary General Kofi Annan said, I only had one Sergio. And what he meant was, I only had one, we say in English, go-to guy. The man that you knew would answer the phone when you called, you knew would deploy to a war zone, to a scene of a natural disaster within minutes of receiving the call, and who, again, could maximize, optimize the chances for healing. He, again, was not a messiah, but he would achieve what could be achieved. There is a man named Lakhdar Brahimi, who was the former Algerian foreign minister, who now, like Sergio, is the person who is called, but he's 80 years old. The UN and other international organizations and even governments have a reputation for eating their young. They are not good at retaining people who have even a fraction of Sergio's gifts. The miracle of Sergio was that he stayed in the organization, that he overcame all of his frustrations with the bureaucracy because he cared so much about the civilians. Most people who have that kind of talent tend to leave organizations like this, and maybe they are the CEOs of companies, or they are on this program, I don't know. But they don't tend to work in the kinds of places he did, and that has to change. I'm hoping that Sergio, that by drawing attention to his life, young people will say, I want to be like that. You know, I don't want to be Pele, I want to be Sergio. But it's going to take time.
Samantha. A senhora despertou minha curiosidade. Posso continuar? Quando a senhora comparou Sérgio Vieira de Mello com James Bond e disse que no Brasil encontrou vários James Bond, eu creio que a senhora estava querendo dizer que ele tem alguma coisa da dinâmica brasileira implicada na atuação, na personalidade do Vieira de Mello. Eu tenho uma curiosidade que é a seguinte, eu observei ao longo desse tempo que ele foi muito pouco apoiado pelo governo brasileiro e pela diplomacia brasileira. E, por outro lado, ele tinha muito pouco nessa atividade, nesse tipo de atividade, né, que leva a senhora a compará-lo com James Bond, do diplomata brasileiro. É quase o oposto do diplomata brasileiro, que é alguém muito mais envolvido com a burocracia, etc. Será que essa falta de apoio, de reconhecimento da parte do Brasil e da parte do Itamaraty se refletiu de alguma forma em algum tipo de mágoa, algum tipo de ressentimento, ou isso passou na medida em que ele, na verdade, era tão pouco brasileiro nesse sentido, né?
It's an excellent question. One of the reasons that Sergio, I think, did stay within the United Nations and endure the frustrations was that he felt he had no place else to go, because in the late 1960s he had been a leftist student, revolutionary in his own mind. He felt that he would be at risk if he came back to Brazil under the military government, and so he kind of grew up within the organization in a way that, had he felt that he could come home politically, he might have grown up in Brazil. He might have worked for the UN for 10 years, come back, join the Brazilian Foreign Ministry. So he became, of course, a true cosmopolitan. I mean, with all of these languages, with all of this experience all over the world. But he, as much as it saddened him not to be able to come home regularly, not to feel welcome here politically, he was an incredibly proud Brazilian, so he always distinguished the government, which he spoke out against strenuously to colleagues and so forth, the military government, from the people, the culture, and his sense of home. And so to give you some kitschy examples, he would wear T-shirts with the Brazilian flag on his car in the United Nations in Geneva. He had a Brazilian flag bumper sticker. He would go every week to the Brazilian consulate in Geneva, and he would get all the major newspapers and magazines and so forth. He stayed very connected, and he really was proud of his association. I think in the last 5 years of his life, his relationship with the government, of course, improved a great deal. But he was very careful not to associate himself in his work as a Brazilian. He believed so strenuously in the idea of the impartial civil servant who is loyal not to the Brazilian flag in his work, but to the UN Charter, to the UN flag. And so I think that what has been interesting for me to come to Brazil now with the book is to hear from people, when he does this, this is Brazilian. And when he does this, this is Brazilian. This capacity to cross from one world to another, from rich to poor, from cocktail party to war zone, to move among multiple identities, this capacity for conciliation and to find the common ground. And what people tell me is this regard for dignity, that this is something that many people here have. Again, I wrote the book on the basis of the Sergio that I discovered, but I think it will be up to Brazilians to tell me actually what about his persona is Brazilian.
Samantha, a Deise de Barros, aqui de São Paulo, pergunta: Vieira de Mello deixou um legado exemplar. Ele era um idealista pragmático. Quais seriam duas de suas lições essenciais para os estadistas e para nós, cidadãos comuns?
Well, the two, I guess, that I would focus on would be one, which would be very important for the U.S. government to listen to, which is talk to your adversaries. Dick Cheney says, we don't negotiate with evil, we conquer it. We defeat evil. And this is not a viable strategy in the 21st century. Sergio's belief was that you have to get in every room. You have to try to understand what makes even aggressors tick. What are their motives? How can you employ carrots and sticks in order to get what you want, in order to protect civilians? So I think negotiation, diplomacy, that's lesson one. And then second, and here there's an interesting parallel with Barack Obama, the next president of the United States, and that is Sergio talked a lot about fear and how dangerous fear was. He, in one of his last speeches before he went to Iraq, he said, fear is a bad advisor. Fear gives bad advice, basically. It distorts our sensibilities. It makes us lunge at imaginary threats sometimes. It makes us support extremists or nationalists sometimes. If we are afraid, we think maybe they will protect us. It is a bad advisor. And I heard Barack Obama a few weeks ago in an interview, and out of his mouth he said, fear gives bad counsel. Fear gives bad counsel, which is the same. And I thought, oh my goodness, he's channeling Sergio. But in America in particular, again, fear has been so stoked up since September 11th. And it's so important to understand that there are real threats and challenges in the world, but you cannot exaggerate them or hype them, or you will actually do things that are very counterproductive, like invade Iraq.
Samantha, o livro anterior que você escreveu, Genocídio, lhe rendeu um prêmio Pulitzer, e era um balanço de várias atrocidades acontecidas no mundo. E esse livro sobre o Sérgio, ainda que seja sobre o Sérgio Vieira de Mello, mas ele é usado um pouco como uma ponte para vários momentos também dramáticos da humanidade. Entre um livro e outro, qual é o balanço que você faz da humanidade? Nós estamos piorando?
Let's see. I think that this book is both a biography of Sergio and, in a sense, a biography of the world. What seems clear is that the world is, as we discussed, more polarized. It is very violent. But there are constituencies that have grown up within countries like Brazil or in the United States who say, we don't tolerate these policies. I mean, I speak again on behalf of my own country. If I had come here on January 1 of this year, and I had told you that a man named Barack Obama was going to be the Democratic nominee, he at that time was 30 percentage points behind in the polls in the United States, you would have said, you've had too many caipirinhas, or something is wrong here. And the fact is, citizens are noticing, I think. You can see with the attention now finally to global warming that it matters to us, even though selfishly we could say, well, it's not, our planet will be fine. It matters to citizens that the planet that they're handing on to their children is 2 degrees hotter than the planet they inherited. It matters to us, and we're showing it more and more, I think, in the pressure we put on governments. But certainly, we have got to get back to the negotiation table. This emphasis on acquisition of money and explosions of economy, I think, distract us from the big picture. And on genocide, I think there has been improvement. We now have an international criminal court that punishes the perpetrators. What was once unthinkable, that you would see peacekeepers in such dangerous places, is now thinkable. Unfortunately, thanks again to the last few years in the United States, what was once unthinkable, torture, state-endorsed torture, is now thinkable in the United States, and that's a tragedy. But again, this is something that's going to be corrected either by Obama or McCain. But so I think it's a mixed picture. But I know we'd be better off, I think, if more people walked in Sergio's footsteps, not just to be inspired by him, but to understand that a lot of what has to be achieved now in the 21st century occurs at a global level, and to understand that it's not like the old days where there's black and white. It's a lot of gray areas. And when you walk with Sergio, you walk with somebody who inhabited the gray areas. And we got to get better at that and become much more patient with how long it takes to actually improve things.
Perfeito. Um minutinho só, Carlos Eduardo, nós precisamos fazer um rápido intervalo. Logo após o intervalo, você fará sua pergunta a Samantha. E nós lembramos que, por tratar-se de um programa gravado, as perguntas dos telespectadores apresentadas aqui chegaram antecipadamente pela internet. E no nosso site www.tvcultura.com.br/Roda Viva. Você pode se informar sobre os nossos próximos programas e enviar por e-mail perguntas, críticas e sugestões. Nós voltamos num instante. Até já. Voltamos com Roda Viva, que hoje recebe a jornalista e escritora Samantha Power. Ela nasceu na Irlanda, mas radicou-se nos Estados Unidos aos 9 anos de idade. Lá, se especializou em relações internacionais e se transformou em assessora para políticas exteriores do candidato democrata à presidência da República, Barack Obama. Carlos Eduardo, eu roubei a sua palavra no finalzinho do último bloco.
Obrigado, Alexandre. Samantha, uma das prioridades de política externa do atual governo brasileiro, nos últimos 6 anos, tem sido conseguir uma reforma na Organização das Nações Unidas, especialmente no seu Conselho de Segurança, e obter uma vaga de membro permanente nesse Conselho. Você acha que esse objetivo é um objetivo atingível? É possível que isso ocorra? Em quanto tempo, se é que isso é possível?
I can't put a timeline on it, but it certainly seems that given the leadership that Brazil is showing in international institutions, on poverty, on so many central international questions, that it has a very strong case to make. The challenge, of course, again, one can talk about the UN as an organization, but the challenge is always politics. And so how, for instance, can Brazil convince other countries in South America that this is a good thing, that Brazil should be the country that has that permanent representation?
Perdão, mas a minha primeira questão é possível mudar a ONU para que haja mais membros permanentes do Conselho de Segurança com os mesmos poderes dos atuais? Porque a minha questão é se é possível fazer a reforma, não se o Brasil depois será um dos membros permanentes, se houver a reforma.
Right, I understood the question. I was trying to get at it again by talking about the fact that it's all about politics. There's no UN, there's no man behind a curtain who says, yes, these changes can be made, yet no, these changes cannot be made. There's no individual, the Secretary General has no say on this, really. It is about whether or not the countries on the Security Council can be convinced that these changes should be made. Right now, and this is a very important point a relevant point for Brazil's candidacy, or for any country's candidacy. Right now, the Security Council is at its most divided that it has been since the creation of the United Nations. Not only do you have the United States and Russia at complete loggerheads with one another, but you also have China speaking out on behalf of sovereignty and being very nervous about any discussions of human rights or humanitarian issues. It is a very, very challenging moment because you have a three-way logjam, which is, in a sense, worse than during the Cold War when it was just the United States and the Soviet Union at odds with one another. So the Security Council itself is paralyzed right now on major issues of international peace and security. And I suspect that given that paralysis and that polarization, those divisions, it will be very difficult to get them to agree politically to reform of the Council in the near future. And that's why, to some degree, these questions, all these questions on reform, in a sense, turn on whether or not you start to have the countries on the Council feeling more conciliatory, being in a more cooperative frame of mind, because then they will see that there is an advantage to sharing the responsibility as well as sharing the leadership. It's very difficult to imagine any of the countries on the Security Council now giving up the veto, and I'm sure they would be concerned about adding a country that would have a veto as well, because then you can imagine just more paralysis. But again, the issue of new candidates doesn't go away because the membership of the Council is so old-fashioned. It looks like a black and white photograph taken in 1945. It's not representative of the world's demographics, of the world's religions, of the world's wealth, of the world's power. It is an anachronism. So it has to change, but the moment right now is a very difficult time to make change because those countries are, at odds with one another.
Samantha, por favor. Você conhece bem profundamente os mecanismos da ONU e também tem bom conhecimento de como funciona a política nos Balcãs, por exemplo. Você consideraria que a iniciativa da ONU de apoiar a independência da província do Kosovo, da Sérvia, foi uma decisão acertada?
Well, the UN, again, was very divided on that issue this year. There were many countries within the UN who did not support Kosovo's independence. My feeling, having traveled to Kosovo, having seen Sergio when he was running Kosovo, he was kind of like the emperor of Kosovo for about 6 weeks in 1999, and having been back since, is that it was going to explode if its status was not defined. And because of the atrocities that had been carried out against ethnic Albanians, who make up 95% of the population of Kosovo, there was no prospect of this province becoming part of Serbia again. Just too many mass graves. It was ethnically relatively homogeneous, and it would have been a recipe for more violence, I think, had the international community pushed for it to go back to Serbia. But with the autonomy arrangement that has been going for almost 10 years, Albanians were starting to say, hey, when do we get to govern ourselves? And the UN, which was in charge, was getting the blame. One of the things that Sergio tried to teach Paul Bremer in Iraq in 2003 was, if you hoard the power, you hoard the blame. If you hold too much power too long, you will be blamed. And Sergio in East Timor, he gave up power as quickly as possible to the Timorese. The UN in Kosovo kept power way too long because the international community couldn't agree on what to do about Kosovo. And the people started becoming very violent toward the UN, viewing it as an occupier. So my feeling was that recognition of Kosovo was the least bad option, but that this was an issue that should have been dealt with 15 years ago to prevent it from getting to this violent place in the first place.
Mas já havia avaliação de que essa decisão poderia influenciar a busca pela autodeterminação dessas repúblicas separatistas do Cáucaso, por exemplo? Já havia uma previsão de que isso pudesse acontecer?
I think that people underestimated Putin and his ambitions and perhaps even his sense of humiliation. But I don't think that Kosovo, because of Kosovo, Putin invaded Georgia. I think that's too simplistic. But I think certainly it gave him an excuse to do something that he wanted to do anyway for quite a long time. And it was one, let's say, indignity in his mind among many over the course of a decade that made him feel like he wanted to flex Russian muscles to show the West that it couldn't just make decisions and not consult him. So I think it was a factor, but again, I think it's very important to judge Putin for what he's doing as well, which is savage ethnic cleansing and really disturbing aggression. But one has to be careful, as you say, in setting precedents going forward.
Posso mudar pouco a direção da nossa conversa aqui, um pouco mais para o futuro e de assuntos que vão estar na pauta nos próximos 2 ou 3 meses. No caso, a questão da eleição nos Estados Unidos, né? Veja, Eu gostaria de saber um pouco a sua opinião, se lhe parece possível, nessa altura do que são as candidaturas que estão colocadas, é possível voltar a pensar em uma política externa americana suprapartidária, bipartisan, ou se vai haver diferenças fundamentais nos rumos da política externa americana. E se for o caso, então, se a senhora achar que é possível, que não é possível um foco comum, mas uma diferença muito grande, quais seriam, digamos, na sua opinião, as diferenças mais essenciais de política externa que separariam Barack Obama, de um lado de John McCain, mas também de George Bush Sr., por exemplo, realmente haveria aí uma nova política externa democrata que não se confunde com a de Clinton, nem que seja bipartidária?
Yeah, I think there'll be a major difference if Senator Obama is elected, both between him and the policies of the 1990s, which were policies made in a much more unipolar world with one sole superpower. Now you have a much more multipolar universe, so the policies by definition would be very different. But let me come to the distinctions between Senator McCain and Senator Obama on foreign policy first. Senator Obama wants to withdraw from Iraq. He wants to withdraw responsibly, not precipitously, but he is withdrawing from Iraq. This is a major difference. Senator McCain wants to stay in Iraq indefinitely. And Senator Obama is very concerned both about the effect of the occupation on Iraqis, but also about the United States' inability really to be a world leader, and even on issues like Georgia, to be so handicapped by this occupation and by this indefinite presence in Iraq. Senator McCain, especially in the context of the Republican Party, has been very strong and I think moral on issues related to torture because of what he himself suffered. And so it looked as though there would be very few differences between Senator Obama and Senator McCain on torture. But lately, unfortunately, I think McCain has moved away from his original position and, for instance, has insisted that the CIA not be held to the same standards that the U.S. military is held to in terms of prohibiting certain practices. And that is very, very worrying, not only because it's wrong and illegal, but because Senator Obama believes, I think, that it's been so counterproductive, the torture, in that it has just emboldened terrorist recruiters and given them more things to point to. So I think that both presidents are going to be, both candidates would be handed incredibly daunting tasks on day one. 2 wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. And right now, more Americans and allied troops are dying in Afghanistan than in Iraq. I mean, suicide attacks are up from 3 the first year to 120 this last year. I don't know why anybody would want to be president of the United States right now. But I think the other difference that's really important is Obama's emphasis on talking to America's adversaries, his desire to be in the room with countries that we've been in tension with. That is a profound difference. His willingness potentially to meet with Chavez, with Ahmadinejad, with these heads of state, I think that puts the United States in a stronger position in the United Nations and other global bodies to rebuild trust. Because people will see, I think, that Senator Obama is making a good faith effort to try to reach common agreement on things. I think Senator McCain will be an improvement on Senator Bush, but it is very worrying to me how many of his policies are just extensions of those of this President Bush, on Iraq, on Pakistan, on Iran, on the major security challenges.
Mais ponto, mas será que a margem de manobra que novo presidente, seja ele Obama ou McCain, teria é suficiente para alterar os rumos de decisões que foram tomadas antes? Quer dizer, no fundo, por exemplo, na questão agora da Georgia, será que, dado que já aconteceu antes, que o senador Obama, eleito presidente, poderia ter uma atitude diferente, ter as mãos menos atadas do que o George Bush?
Look, when you are the President of the United States, you're in a democracy, in a republic. There is a Congress. That Congress will be probably roughly divided between Democrats and Republicans. I think Democrats will win both houses, so Obama would have a real advantage if if his party controlled the Senate and the House. But there's no question that there is a separation of powers and that the president cannot snap his fingers and turn back the clock. There's no question. But a president has tremendous power to change the course of history, as George Bush has shown. I mean, if one wonders what a president can do, especially if he controls both houses of Congress, one just has to look at the radical changes that have been made. So on torture, I think there's a real issue that you raise, which is, what do you do with the people who've already been tortured? What do you do with the detainees who've already been in American custody? And how do you develop a transparent legal process in order to manage the wreckage that you've been handed by President Bush? That is a real issue. But on the question of whether the United States stands for torture, that is a no-brainer, as Dick Cheney would say. I think Obama will come out very explicitly about closing Guantanamo, renouncing torture, ending the practice of rendition. And these are things he can do within the first week in office in terms of changing the absolute direction of the country. And on Iraq, the American people and the Congress, the majority in the Congress, are for withdrawal. The U.S. military is for withdrawal because it can't sustain fourth and fifth tours for young men, at this pace. It's not in a position to do what it needs to do in Afghanistan, and military families have been torn apart by this war. So there's a lot of political support, actually, for some of the things that Obama is proposing. But you're right, it's not a snap your fingers endeavor.
Samantha, nós precisamos fazer um intervalo, mas antes eu queria fazer uma pergunta seguinte. Há no Brasil muita simpatia pela posição política do Partido Democrata. Geralmente, o Partido Democrata é visto pelo Brasil como um partido mais à esquerda, um partido mais aberto do que os republicanos. No entanto, historicamente, os democratas são muito mais protecionistas do que os republicanos. Os democratas, em função dos seus compromissos com os sindicatos, com os trabalhadores americanos, tendem a fechar muito mais a economia do que os republicanos, que são mais abertos. E para o Brasil é fundamental a possibilidade de um comércio mais aberto, mais livre com os Estados Unidos. Eu gostaria de saber se o senador Barack Obama tem essa visão e tem essa percepção de que, de um lado, a política americana pode ser protecionista porque tem alguns compromissos, mas que deve pensar nos seus parceiros como os parceiros das Américas.
I think that Obama has, throughout the campaign, at least tried to make it clear how much of a priority relations with Latin America and South America are. He's been very explicit about that. I don't know how much of that message makes it through the media filter when people are more interested in sound bites and so forth. But Obama has been very clear throughout his whole career that he is not a protectionist, that he believes in free trade. It was, of course, a Democrat who brought NAFTA, brought the world NAFTA, and which created a precedent for free trade agreements, and that was President Clinton, with whom Obama is now consulting regularly. So I don't think that there should be any alarms in this part of the world about what an Obama presidency would mean. He is, as you said, because he is a progressive, and I think shares so many of the values of the Brazilian people and the Brazilian government, interested in human rights standards and environmental standards and labor standards, and we should be interested in these things, and we shouldn't allow our reverence for the market to interfere with our respect for future generations and for the rights of workers today. So it's a balance, but Obama believes in the market, and he's not a protectionist. And I should say that I am getting to meet wonderfully with President Lula while I am here in Brazil, and Obama has asked me to deliver the message that he is very eager to sit down with President Lula very early on in his presidency and forge this new partnership.
Ok. Bem, então vamos àquele intervalo que eu já havia mencionado, lembrando que a memória do Roda Viva está disponível em nosso site www.tvcultura.com.br/Roda Viva, onde você pode pesquisar o conteúdo do nosso arquivo e também mandar os seus e-mails com críticas e sugestões. A gente volta num instante. Até lá. Você acompanha hoje no Roda Viva a entrevista com Samantha Power. Jornalista, ela foi correspondente de guerra e cobriu conflitos na antiga Iugoslávia, Sudão, Ruanda e Timor-Leste. Além de jornalista, ela é professora da Universidade de Harvard. Bom, vamos seguindo a nossa conversa com a Laís, que tem perguntas dos nossos telespectadores. Laís.
Bom, Augusto Bonifácio Vieira, de Volta Redonda, Rio de Janeiro, pergunta: como um provável governo Barack Obama se relacionará com a América do Sul, especialmente com o Brasil, no que se refere ao aspecto econômico?
I don't know that I have much to add on that question. I mean, I think the fact that Latin America and Brazil have not been shown respect as full partners, I think, in the international system is something that will be changed very, very quickly. And then it's a question of sitting down and rolling up the sleeves and understanding how to go forward. You know, I think this is a real priority for Obama, not least because if we're to fix the international system, we've got to build coalitions of the concerned, of governments that see human rights and human dignity in similar ways. And I think Brazil and the United States can provide a nucleus for that.
Samantha.
Ok, Samantha.
Você mencionou há pouco a ideia de um dia se discutir a possibilidade de fechar a prisão de Guantánamo. Você acha que está muito longe ainda o dia que os Estados Unidos vão discutir a devolução de Guantánamo para Cuba, que eles ocupam há 105 anos?
That I don't know, but I think the important, urgent priority is to close the detention facilities and give the people who are within those facilities fair and transparent legal processes. That is step one. Hopefully, in a post-Castro era, there will be all kinds of negotiations going forward, but I can't speak to that issue.
Mas você concorda que a existência de Guantánamo, um território, um enclave dentro de um outro país, não é um símbolo do antigo colonialismo, do antigo imperialismo?
Again, the United States has a lot of bases around the world. I think it's something that will be negotiated once the United States and Cuba are back to having relationships. I mean, relations, diplomatic relations have been closed down for so many decades, and the only people that has really hurt are the Cuban people. And that is the priority. I think more than any symbols, it's important to think about Cuban welfare and the freedom of people in that society.
Samantha.
Já virou um lugar comum nessa campanha dizer que se a eleição fosse realizada no mundo inteiro, o senador Obama ganharia por larga margem, mas que, infelizmente, quem decide quem vai ser o presidente dos Estados Unidos é o povo americano, infelizmente para o resto do mundo. E há dúvidas se o senador será realmente capaz de vencer a eleição. Gostaria de perguntar a você se a questão racial, embora não explicitamente, ainda pode ser um obstáculo para que o senador vença a eleição.
Well, I mean, are there still people who have racial prejudices in the United States? For sure, no question. The people in every country who have racial prejudices. Will some number of Americans not vote for Obama because he is an African American? Yes, some number will not. You can see it in terms of public statements of people who are very explicit that they're not ready for that. But the amazing thing about the Obama candidacy is how many people have overcome their racial prejudices because they have gotten to see a person like him in office doing as well as he has with the policy proposals that he has put forth. And I have to say that most of the people who bring such a strong racial prejudice are probably not people who would be voting for a Democratic candidate anyway. They tend to be people who are more conservative, on the far, we would say on the far right of the political spectrum. And the key, I think, for Obama's success is to continue the energizing of the young people. More young people have voted, more African Americans have voted in the primary, where usually people don't vote at all, than any time in history. And, are there some number of Democrats who might be affected by the racial issue? Maybe, but is that number offset by the number of new voters and the number of Republicans who have been converted because they want to get out of Iraq, because they believe he has a better plan for the economy, etc.
Os sindicalistas, especialmente, alguém já disse que o grande problema do senador Obama é a grande baleia branca, que são os sindicalistas mais pobres, brancos, mais velhos, menos educados, que foram a base de sustentação da campanha da senadora Clinton. Esse grupo não é um grupo expressivo que vota nos democratas sempre e que poderá deixar de votar no senador Obama?
Well, I think it does a disservice, actually, to Senator Clinton to say, well, they didn't vote for Obama because he was an African-American. They voted for Clinton because she was maybe white, or to imagine that that was about race. I think they were familiar with the Clinton policies from the 1990s. Many of those people, they liked those policies. They like Senator Clinton. They believe that she would bring back some of the prosperity of the 1990s. And I think, as you say, on balance, they supported they supported Senator Clinton. But what has been amazing in recent weeks is to see Senator Clinton and Senator Obama campaigning together, going back to those audiences, showing the unity of the Democratic Party. And what you're starting to see in the polls is they're shifting. Again, will some number of those people maybe turn Republican? Maybe. But again, I wouldn't always assume it's the racial issue. These are people who have independent minds. And the key, again, is Obama's unusual support among Republicans, among independents who do not want to see a continuation of the Bush years, among African Americans who've never voted in these kinds of numbers before, and among a whole new base of young people. People in the United States feel that the stakes have never been higher, ever. And even for people who now, in the working class or whatever, who might be hesitating about Obama, when they get into the voting booth, they will have to ask themselves, do we want 4 more years of tax cuts for the very wealthy? Do we want our constituency to continue to be ignored? Or should we go with a party that has serviced us much more beneficially over the years?
Samantha, por favor, Samantha. Na esteira da pergunta do Taquari, até sobre Cuba, eu perguntaria a você qual é a real disposição do senador Obama na possibilidade de ele chegar à Casa Branca, de ele atacar realmente, radicalmente, alguns tabus da política externa americana, entre os quais um deles é Cuba, e a gente tem agora também a questão do Irã, tem a recente troca de insultos com o presidente Hugo Chávez. Existe uma disposição do senador de agir diplomaticamente, realmente diplomaticamente, em relação a essas questões, a esses temas?
Well, I think he has the answer for that. I mean, he's shown over the course of the last 18 months on this grueling campaign, again and again, a willingness to break with what you rightly call taboos. I mean, when Obama came out and said that he would be willing to meet with Ahmadinejad, who's a Holocaust denier, who supports terrorism, who's involved in very dangerous ways, nasty ways in Iraq. I mean, people said, what are you doing, Obama? You can't say that in American politics. And he said, but it would be reckless not to try to engage diplomatically. That is the irresponsible thing, is to not engage diplomatically. When he said that he wanted to allow travel and family and remittances for family members to Cuba, people said, Obama, you can't say that. Florida, the voters in Florida, you can't say that. He said, but at what point are we going to acknowledge that our policy toward Cuba is a failed policy? And I should say that maybe the best example of his willingness to break with taboos is his position on the war in Iraq back in 2002. know in Brazil most people understood that this was a very stupid war, but strangely in the United States this was a minority opinion, that it was a dumb war. Most people supported the war. They believed the president, that there was a real threat posed by Saddam Hussein. And Obama, in the midst of a Senate campaign, stood up and said, I am not against all wars, I am just against dumb wars. And this is a major mistake. We will distract ourselves from al-Qaeda, we will put a terrible burden on military families, and we will undermine our standing in the world. We can't before this war. The political consultant said, no, Obama, you've already got the name Obama. You're going to have a difficult political life anyway with this name. You really want to oppose this very popular war? And he said, absolutely, because it's the right thing to do. So again, you've got to bring the country along. You can't go from 0 to 60, as we say. You can't drive from 0 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour overnight. But in terms of his political courage, I think it's been demonstrated over the last recent years.
Samantha, queria voltar à questão do livro. Seria exagerado dizer que o trabalho do Sérgio Vieira de Mello ele incomodava certos setores identificados como falcões da guerra no Iraque? Por exemplo, você mencionou há pouco que o Dick Cheney ele não queria conversa com setores radicais. O trabalho dele incomodava esses setores?
I think the United States was very torn. Sergio confused them. Even the Bush administration was confused by Sergio because, on the one hand, this administration held the UN in relative contempt. George Bush went to the UN General Assembly and said, you are just like the League of Nations, you're irrelevant, you're a debating society. And then, of course, the United States ignored the Security Council lack of consensus on the war and went to war anyway without authorization. Sergio met with President Bush in March of 2003 in what would become in retrospect, a fateful meeting. In the meeting, Sergio brought up Guantanamo, the International Criminal Court, and the fate of detainees all around the world in American facilities. And yet somehow, out of this meeting, George Bush decided that he liked Sergio. Not only did he like him, he decided Sergio was maybe the most interesting, charismatic, important diplomat that he had met in his first term. So Sergio had this ability to deliver this message that George Bush did not want to talk about the International Criminal Court. He did not want to talk about Guantanamo, but somehow Sergio managed to convince Bush that Sergio was a man that Bush could do business with. And Sergio's attitude was, I want to get in the room with George Bush because I want to understand what makes him tick, and I want to try to have the most influence possible. There are a lot of people criticizing, denouncing Bush and Cheney in the UN and elsewhere. I want to be the person in the room. Now, when he got to Iraq, as you said, Sergio put forth what in retrospect were completely the right policy options. There had to be monitors in US prisons because torture was a risk. This was a year and a half before Abu Ghraib. Sergio said, there will be torture if you do not have proper accountability in the prisons. He was ignored. Sergio said, you have to end this occupation quickly. The dignity of Iraqis is being trampled. Remember, he said, if there were tanks in Copacabana, how would I feel? I would have maybe myself become an insurgent. And again, Paul Bremer did not listen to him. And he was insistent, as you said, that you have to engage the extremists. Sergio, in the very short time he was in Iraq, met with the very influential Shiite cleric al-Sistani, who's one of the most important people in Iraq, and he met with Muqtada al-Sadr, the bad boy cleric who has been very destructive. Sergio's view was, let me get in the room, let me see how they work, let me see if there's any chance that we can get them to support peaceful handover of power. And I think at that point, the Bush administration, on the one hand, they knew that things were falling apart, so they were looking at Sergio and he had all these ideas and they were thinking, oh, it's falling apart, maybe we should try some of this. But they were still in a phase where they thought they had the answers. Even though they had screwed everything up to that point, they still had the sense that Sergio was the UN. Yes, he had a lot of experience in other transitional circumstances, but he was the UN. What did a Brazilian know about big, geopolitics? And the fact is, after Sergio's death, maybe 3 or 4 months after virtually every policy that Sergio had proposed, the United States had no choice but to embrace. But it was too late for Sergio.
Samantha, vamos abrir de novo espaço para os nossos telespectadores.
O Eduardo Rodrigues, do Rio de Janeiro, diz: era notório que Sérgio Vieira de Mello não desejava ir para o Iraque. O caminhão-bomba foi colocado e explodiu especificamente ao lado do escritório dele. Você acha que ele era o alvo principal daquele atentado?
One of the things that I found just maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, was the confession of the person who drove the suicide bomber to the scene of the crime. He was an Al-Qaeda operative named Al-Kurdi, and reading his confession is one of the most chilling things that I have done in my life, because he knows Sergio so well. He knows what Sergio did in Bosnia, and he thought, Al-Kurdi, the terrorist, thought that Sergio was too close to the Serbs and that he was not good to the Bosnians. Sergio, while in Bosnia, rescued 500 Bosnian Muslims in the back seat of his car, smuggled them out of Sarajevo. Al-Kurdi didn't know that. He only knew what he chose to know. He only plucked selectively these details. He knew that Sergio had helped bring East Timor to independence, which was one of Sergio's great successes. But to Al-Kurdi, it meant that Sergio helped take a piece of territory away from a Muslim nation. Again, he didn't know how Sergio had helped so many people in Indonesia over the years, how many people he'd helped in Lebanon, how many people he'd helped in Afghanistan and Iraq, Muslims. All he saw was what he wanted to see. So to your question, they definitely knew who Sergio was. They knew what he had done. But they also really were determined to drive international organizations out of Iraq. The terrorists knew that they would not do well in Iraq if people like Sergio were still there. The terrorists thought, if it's just us against George Bush, maybe we'll do okay, because we'll bring people, or we'll be against the occupation, they'll come to our side. But they knew that if Sergio succeeded in bringing reconstruction assistance, in having early elections, in drafting a constitution, in ending torture and abuses in prisons, or preventing it before it started, if Sergio were successful, that hurts the terrorists. And they understood that, so they wanted to drive out not just him personally, but the entire effort to end the occupation and to provide these services.
Vamos fazer mais um intervalo e voltamos já já com a entrevista da jornalista e escritora Samantha Power. Até lá. E voltamos com o último bloco do Roda Viva dessa noite. Você acompanha a entrevista com a jornalista e escritora Samantha Power, autora da biografia do diplomata brasileiro Sérgio Vieira de Mello, que acabou de ser lançada em português. Samantha, algumas primeiras damas nos Estados Unidos tiveram uma participação muito importante na vida americana, seja socialmente, como Jack Kennedy, como também politicamente, como Hillary Clinton. E eu gostaria que você contasse para os nossos espectadores como é que é Michelle Obama, que é adorada por muita gente e está cada vez mais aparecendo na mídia americana, se transformando numa figura importante. Qual é o papel que ela deve ter nessa eventual eleição de Barack Obama?
I don't know Michelle well personally, but I know a few things about her because of working for Obama himself. The most important thing that we should know about Michelle Obama was that when she met Barack, she was his boss. And the dynamic has not changed. She worked at a law firm. He was a young kind of intern in the law firm, and I think he idolized her. And I think the same is true today. They have a great romance. One of the reasons I don't know her well is that she's done such an incredible job keeping the children away from this crazy campaign and just the savagery of American politics this year. So she spends a lot of time, being a mother and continuing to maintain the household. To have such small children, very difficult in politics. Once Obama actually takes over in the White House, I think it'll be interesting to see. She's described actually an admiration for Laura Bush, who, whatever the mistakes of her husband as a president, has been very, very influential in doing humanitarian work in Africa and elsewhere. And I think you could see a role like that for Michelle Obama. But the important thing is that she is his main intellectual, emotional, political confidant. So her greatest role will be a little bit like Bobby Kennedy, even before he became Attorney General and established his own position of power. John F. Kennedy went to Bobby Kennedy first. Barack Obama trusts Michelle Obama. She will have a huge impact, on the decisions that he makes. And I think on the basis of her intellect, her experience in the world, her management experience, she's going to be a major asset. People used to say that if Senator Clinton won, which it was a very close race and she almost did, that we'd get 2 for 1, Bill and Hillary, Bill back and then Hillary again. And that would have been incredible in its own way. But I think we have a great bargain here as well with these two for one.
Samantha, o presidente Bush disse há poucos dias que a invasão da Geórgia pela Rússia é inaceitável no século XXI. Fora, além do aspecto da falta de autocrítica do homem que ordenou a invasão do Iraque, também não tem aí uma questão de assessoria, um homem mal assessorado, porque ele critica o país por fazer exatamente o que os Estados Unidos fizeram no Iraque?
Well, again, I think it's really important to focus on the dying Georgians today. And so, if governments allowed their past decisions to interfere with them ever saying or doing anything again, you wouldn't have a single head of state speaking on any issue in the world. But I agree with you that it makes it very difficult for President Bush to be heard in good faith in the international system after the invasion of Iraq. There is a difference. I mean, I think that Russia invaded a neighbor. The United States did not invade Mexico in order to kind of annex Mexico. The ambition even of John McCain and even of President Bush is to get out of Iraq at some point once the situation is stable and they feel that al-Qaeda is dealt with. The problem is that could be in 20 years or 100 years. Putin has gone in and very willfully now set these militia out into doing ethnic cleansing and violating human rights on a massive scale. And it is important for every leader to be speaking out in some fashion. Would it be more effective if President Bush were speaking as part of a NATO alliance? Probably. And I think that's the next step. As NATO ministers meet, it's incredibly important that they speak in one voice. Because as you say, in a lot of communities, the United States is not heard in the way that it once was.
Samantha, posso lhe pedir uma avaliação sobre a questão do Paquistão? Nós estamos vivendo aí mais uma crise política séria no Paquistão e a gente sabe como o Paquistão é importante em termos de geopolítica, especialmente de segurança. O que você acha que pode acontecer com o Paquistão? Qual é a possibilidade do Al-Qaeda ganhar ainda mais território, santuários no território paquistanês, ou até dos extremistas islâmicos chegarem ao poder no Paquistão? A questão nuclear, passar conhecimento nuclear, tecnologia nuclear para os terroristas. Como é que você encara os desdobramentos desta crise no Paquistão?
Well, I agree with Senator Obama, who's been very outspoken on this, that the United States' very uncritical support for Musharraf over the last few years has been counterproductive. It has stifled democracy in Pakistan, and in return, Musharraf did not do much in order to deal with al-Qaeda and the rise of Islamism. He made a kind of devil's bargain, a Faustian bargain, with the radicals in order to maintain power and in order to keep the moderates and the Democrats down. They have now risen, and one of the things that recent elections in Pakistan have shown is that when the Islamists have power and they govern, the results have not been welcomed by the citizens, and there has been, in free elections, a backlash against governing. In other words, one strategy is to exclude political Islamists from elections altogether. But the problem then is people start to say, oh, if they were only in power, you know, they would be so much better than these corrupt guys who, and it turns out when the Islamists run, they're equally corrupt and in recent history, less effective. So I think that the key question now is how can one support the moderates who actually run Pakistan, who want to see democracy flourish, but who, as you suggest, have been quite mild in dealing with the sanctuaries for Al-Qaeda and other elements. Yelling at them and talking down to them, I think, is not the way to ensure that they cooperate with the United States and other NATO countries in dealing with the terrorist threat. But what the incentives are and what the carrots and sticks may be, you know, again, I think that's better left to a president who comes in with a clean slate and without a record of having supported a dictator uncritically without asking what it meant for Pakistani people.
Samantha, uma das questões muito complexas no mundo atual é a questão das migrações, né? Os países mais ricos se ressentem das pessoas que vêm dos países mais pobres e isso está se transformando em situações muito delicadas entre os países. Como é que o senador Obama vê essa questão? Como é que ele pensa essa questão?
Well, we're starting to stray away from my expertise into areas that I'm not an expert on at all. But I know on the issue of immigration that Obama has said that, you know, we have to create a pathway to citizenship for people who have come to the United States on whom the U.S. economy, in a sense, depends. But amnesties and things like that, the risk of those is that then millions of more people come and that you have just the floodgates are open. So he's for tighter border security so that you can't just show up and decide you want to live someplace else. You have to go through a process, but also for recognizing just how valuable this immigrant and even illegal immigrant culture has been to the U.S. economy over time. You've got to find a way, again, to balance. I think because of Obama's own heritage, he has a particular sensitivity to the richness of the American fabric, of the American story. I mean, like Brazil, such a diverse country with so many strands of nationality and ethnicity and religion coming together. And because Obama himself still has a grandmother who lives barefoot in a hut in Kenya, spent time in Indonesia as a boy, you know, I think he has a real cosmopolitan sense, but he also has to look out for American security and American workers and make sure that he's balancing these issues.
Okay.
Eu gostaria de ser um pouco mais provocante e franco a respeito da candidatura do senador Obama. Quanto mais ele me impressiona pelo seu extraordinário carisma, sua comunicação, facilidade de comunicação e a sua eficiência da sua estratégia de campanha, né? Uma estratégia perfeita e vitoriosa, que teve vários obstáculos, mas superou esses obstáculos porque tinha clareza de onde queria chegar, ao contrário da estratégia da senadora Clinton, que foi um fracasso total, né? Mas quanto mais isso me impressiona, sobretudo a sua capacidade de mobilizar sentimentos, né? Me impressiona menos a sua capacidade de formular com clareza os rumos da política, né? Só pegar no aspecto da política externa, por exemplo, eu não vi ainda nenhum sinal de uma política relativa à América Latina, ou às Américas, né? A parte de questões relativas à imigração. A impressão que dá, às vezes, é que o senador Obama tem do mundo latino a visão da imigração para os Estados Unidos, mas não conhece bem a realidade e não formulou até agora nada de muito claro a respeito disso, né? Mesmo com relação à questão de segurança, existem pontos muito específicos, Guantánamo, questão de tortura, etc., mas eu não vejo, digamos, o que seria a visão de um próximo período no qual o papel dos Estados Unidos e a sua relação com outros países mudaria. Quer dizer, é fácil a gente dizer que vai conversar com os adversários, vai conversar com os rivais, etc., etc., mas isso é apenas uma parte da questão, porque dificilmente numa conversa ou num entendimento pessoal de chefe de Estado, algo de sério muda na política externa. Então, por exemplo, qual é a política para o Irã? Além de vamos conversar e negociar, quais são as metas, né? Em que direção se vai? Eu gostaria de ter um pouco mais de clareza sobre isso.
Well, I think that your perspective with this provocative question is one that is shared by a number of people. People think he's great speeches, he's a great organizer, you know, he's been an incredible CEO of this extraordinary comeback, I mean, or rise of the underdog, etc. And all I can say to you is it's very frustrating when I hear questions like this because on foreign policy, for instance, Obama gave in the primary season, I've lost count now, but something like 37 major policy addresses. You know, one specific speech on how to deal with terrorism, another speech on how to deal with free trade, another speech on what to do about nuclear nonproliferation, one on global warming, and you know, and it was at a level of detail, and he has these massive policy briefs that are available to you and everyone else if you're interested in the details. The trouble is, in the media, at least in the United States, there's not that much interest in the details. They'd sooner, you know, say he said, she said, and use these sound bites. They like Obama's inspirational speeches, so they broadcast them. Obama has had now for going on 2 years something like 300 foreign policy advisors gathered into working groups, each of which, you know, might discuss food policy in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's a big, you know, kind of detailed plan as to where that would go. So there is no shortage of specifics, no shortage of plans, no shortage of familiarity on the part of Obama with these plans, leadership in drafting these plans. But in campaigns, campaigns are not known for their very sophisticated, granular discussions of direction. Obama is trying to convince American voters who 4 years ago had never heard of him that he can be a commander-in-chief, that he understands the issues that matter to them. He's trying to be responsive in the town halls and other things, you know. And to be honest, he's not, you know, in a sense, he's concerned about meeting the needs of everyday people, putting the policies out there to assure others that he will be a commander-in-chief, but he can't control the media culture and the way that the policies he put out are processed and simplified.
Numa campanha, todos os detalhes, eles são feitos por assessores, por participantes que dão ideias, etc. O candidato raramente participa desse nível de detalhamento, mas em questões práticas, como, por exemplo, a questão da Colômbia, que é uma questão vital para os Estados Unidos, aparentemente ele ignorou essa questão.
He, again, on Colombia, I think issued something like 6 statements on it. He's very involved day to day. He gets a foreign policy briefing every morning on the issues of the day and carries around briefing books that I would not want to carry or read. So again, I don't agree with you, but I agree that this is an impression that when he becomes president, he will have to offset.
Samantha, nós estamos chegando ao final do programa e somente com uma provocação, eu queria só uma perguntinha rápida para você. A senadora Hillary Clinton é ou não é um monstro?
No, never was. No. Have you ever lost your temper and regretted it for the rest of your life? That's what happened to me. No, I think the world of her. I always have. She's a hero to women who try to do this kind of work.
Ok. Eu quero agradecer muito a sua presença, agradecer a presença da escritora, da jornalista Samantha Power e também da bancada dos nossos entrevistadores. Agradecemos também a sua atenção e colaboração, lembrando que as perguntas dos telespectadores que não foram apresentadas durante o programa serão encaminhadas à nossa convidada. Roda Viva estará de volta na próxima segunda-feira, às 10h10 da noite. Uma ótima semana a todos. Até lá.